Before we advance to the vid ritual, grant your like as an offering, swear your subscription as a vow, and ignite the hype in the Emperor's name. Your devotion fortifies this mission. You have my gratitude, faithful one.
Imagine a warrior clad in midnight black power armor, illuminated by the flickering light of 1,000 devotional candles. She stands in a ruined cathedral on some distant world, her voice rising in a hymn even as gunfire echoes around her. In her hands, a bolter, the holy instrument of the god Emperor's wrath, barks righteous fury at twisted heretics. With each thunderous shot and each verse of prayer, she drives back the darkness. This is no space marine, but something arguably just as formidable, a battle sister of the Adepta Sororitas. There's an old saying, "No fury like a woman scorned." Now ye imagine that woman has been scorned by the impure and the heretic, armed with a flamethrower, and given the divine mandate to burn anything unholy. Welcome to the Adepta Sororitas, also known as the Sisters of Battle, the all-female holy warriors of the Imperium of Man. They are sometimes colloquially called female space marines. But don't let that nickname fool you. The Sisters of Battle are a very different breed, driven not by genetic enhancements or hypno-conditioning, but by pure, unshakable faith. And in the grim darkness of the far future, faith can be a weapon mightier than any bolter or blade. From their origins in one of the darkest periods of Imperial history to their modern role on the battlefields of a war-torn galaxy, the story of the Adepta Sororitas is one of faith tested by fire, sometimes literally. It's a tale of zeal and devotion, of martyrs and miracles, of betrayal and redemption. So steel yourself, light a candle or a whole pyre, and prepare to delve into the complete saga of the Adepta Sororitas, who they are, where they came from, and why entire armies of battle-hardened soldiers tremble when these nuns with guns arrive on the field, singing praises to the Emperor. Origins, the daughters of the Emperor and the Reign of Blood. To discover how this sisterhood was born, we must travel back roughly 4,000 years from the present to an era of unimaginable turmoil in Imperial history, the early 36th millennium, a time known as the Age of Apostasy. It was during this chaotic period that the Adepta Sororitas emerged, tempered in the fires of civil war and religious schism. Our tale begins on a remote world called Saint Celestine. There, hidden from the wider Imperium, existed a small but fanatically devout warrior cult known as the Daughters of the Emperor Picture, an isolated sisterhood of elite female warriors, each one dedicating her life to the worship of the god Emperor and to the perfection of martial skills. They were cloistered away, spending their days in prayer, penance, and rigorous combat training. At a glance, they might have seemed like just another obscure sect in a galaxy teeming with religions. But fate had grand plans for these daughters. Enter Goge Vandire, a name cursed in history. Vandire was a High Lord of Terra, a master manipulator who at one point simultaneously held the titles of Ecclesiarch, head of the Imperial Church, and High Lord of the Administratum, basically the galaxy-spanning bureaucracy. In the kindest terms, Vandire was power-hungry and paranoid. In less kind terms, he was a raving megalomaniac. During the Age of Apostasy, Vandire's tyranny and corruption plunged the Imperium into chaos. He used the imperial faith as a weapon, twisting the ecclesiarchy into his personal tool of domination. Planets that defied him were subjected to horrific persecution in the name of the Emperor. This era would later be remembered as the Reign of Blood, a time of insane wars and purges orchestrated by Vandire's command. Amid this bloody upheaval, Vandire learned of the Daughters of the Emperor on Saint Celestine. Here was an all-female cult of devout warriors, isolated, disciplined, and skilled. Exactly what Vandire needed. A private army that could enforce his will under the guise of religious authority, Vandire, ever the schemer, set out to bend these warriors to his service. When his envoys arrived, the daughters of the Emperor initially refused to acknowledge Vandire's authority. After all, why would these pious fighters on a backwater world obey some distant bureaucrat, even if he claimed to speak for the Emperor? Vandire anticipated their skepticism and staged one of the most infamous parlor tricks in Imperial history. He invited the leaders of the daughters to witness a miracle. In their presence, Vandire boldly ordered one of his own soldiers to shoot him with a las gun. Imagine the scene. The soldier, eyes wide in disbelief, hesitates, then fires point blank at the High Lord. Gasps echo as the bright lance of energy slams into Vandire and does absolutely nothing. Vandire stands utterly unharmed, as if protected by the Emperor's own hand. The daughters of the Emperor, awestruck and perhaps a bit naive in the ways of Terran technology, dropped to their knees in instant reverence. They believed the Emperor had just given them a sign of Vandire's divine favor. Of course, the reality was far more mundane and deeply cynical. Vandire wore a powerful rosarius, a force field generator used by high-ranking clergy as a defensive shield. Only he knew it was active. The shot that should have killed him was absorbed by this hidden force field, but the daughters had no way of knowing that to them, Vandire had just proved he was the chosen of the Emperor, a man literally immune to harm through divine protection. One can almost imagine Vandire's smug inner smile as the warrior women of San Lior swore allegiance on the spot. In that moment, the daughters of the Emperor became Vandire's personal, elite bodyguards. He grandiosely renamed them the Brides of the Emperor, implying they were wed to the Emperor himself, with Vandire as the self-proclaimed voice and representative of the Emperor's will. It was a sickeningly clever piece of propaganda and flattery, and it worked. With their loyalty secured through deceit, Vandire brought the brides of the Emperor to Terra. These devout women became his most zealous enforcers, clad in gleaming power armor and utter conviction. They enforced Vandire's decrees across the Imperium. They stormed rebellious cathedrals, executed heretical governors, often just Vandire's political enemies, and put entire populations to the torch in the name of faith. In their hearts, the brides likely believed they were purging the wicked and carrying out the Emperor's justice. In reality, they were unwittingly furthering the ambitions of a madman. For a time, Vandire's brides were feared far and wide. Ordinary citizens, already terrified by the wars of the Reign of Blood, now whispered of the angelic warriors who served the evil ecclesiarch. These warrior women were utterly loyal, incorruptible in their faith, and therefore extremely dangerous under Vandire's command. Other Imperial forces hesitated to fight them. After all, they still carried the banner of the Emperor's Church. Who could question the piety of women who sang hymns as they set flame to the unfaithful? But Vandire's reign was built on lies, and lies have a way of collapsing. As his atrocities piled up, opposition inevitably rose. Revolts broke out on distant worlds. A charismatic priest named Sebastian Thor began preaching against Vandire's corruption, igniting a popular rebellion. Segmentum commanders, Space Marine chapters, and even elements of the Inquisition started to see Vandire as the true heretic. Civil war engulfed the Imperium. Terra itself became a battleground. The once all-powerful High Lord found himself holed up in the ecclesiarchal palace on Terra, besieged by those who had once been his allies. And here is where the fate of the brides of the Emperor, the proto-sisters of battle, took a dramatic turn. Terra was in open conflict. Vandire, paranoid and wrathful, commanded his brides to hold the palace against all comers. These women, still believing in him, stood ready to slaughter anyone attempting to oust their holy master. And opposing them were not only human armies, but the mightiest heroes of the Imperium, the Adeptus Custodes, the golden-armored guardians of the Emperor himself, had decided Vandire needed to go. Imagine the absurdity of the situation. On one side, the personal guard of the Master of Mankind. On the other, an army of power-armored nuns convinced that the Master of Mankind wanted them to obey Vandire. A tragic, deadly misunderstanding. The custodians, unwilling to needlessly slaughter these misguided but loyal women, attempted diplomacy. They marched into the ecclesiarchal palace under banners of truce. Weathering the suspicious glares of the brides' accounts say the air was tense. The brides of the Emperor were ready to die to protect Vandire, and the custodes, those warriors who literally never leave the Emperor's side, had no doubt about Vandire's guilt. Words alone would not sway the brides, so the custodes sought a different approach. Show them the truth. The legend, and it has become legend now, goes that the Captain General of the Custodes himself escorted the leader of the brides, a woman named Alicia Dominica, deep into the heart of the Imperial Palace. With her went 5 of her most trusted sisters, women by the names of Catherine, Silvana, Lucia, Mina, and Arabella. These 6 were the finest of the brides of the Emperor, the very heart of Vandire's elite. One can imagine the silent journey through the shadowed, sacred halls of the palace, vaulting architecture built by the Emperor's own design, the custodians walking ahead in stoic silence, and Dominica and her sisters perhaps clutching their weapons tightly, uncertain but curious. They were being led towards the ultimate authority in the Imperium. Not Vandire, not any High Lord, but the Golden Throne itself, the chamber where the Emperor of Mankind has sat ensconced, a deathless husk sustaining the Imperium for millennia. What happened when Dominica and her companions stood before the Emperor is officially a mystery. The brides were sworn to secrecy about the encounter, but something profound clearly occurred. The common interpretation is that in that silent, eternity-long moment, the Emperor imparted a message to Alicia Dominica, perhaps not in words, for who can say if the near-corpse Emperor can speak, but in psychic revelation or pure understanding. Maybe he showed her a vision of Vandire's soul, black with treachery. Maybe he simply allowed his divine presence to be felt, washing away the fog of lies from the bride's minds. Perhaps he even uttered a few words. No record remains, only speculation. We only know that when Alicia Dominica emerged from the Golden Throne's sanctum, she had absolute clarity in her eyes and righteous anger burning in her heart. The 6 leaders returned, grim and determined, to Vandire's audience chamber. Imagine Vandire, likely half-crazed by this point, surrounded by enemies, yet still drowning in denial and ego, seeing his once devoted bodyguards stride in with weapons drawn, and no gleam of reverence in their eyes anymore. Dominica looked upon the man she had followed, the man she had worshipped as the Emperor's chosen, and condemned him as a traitor and heretic. One swift motion, and Alicia Dominica took Goge Vandire's head from his shoulders with her blade, ending his reign of blood in a single stroke. The insane tyrant's last reported words were a petulant, disbelieving cry. "I don't have time to die. I'm too busy." If one needed a final illustration of his madness, there it was, as if bureaucratic schedules could forestall death. Thus ended the rule of Vandire, by the very hand of the leader of his brides. It was a poetic justice. Those he had deceived became his executioners. In that moment, the brides of the Emperor ceased to exist as Vandire's private army. They had awoken from a nightmare of lies. Once again, they would call themselves the daughters of the Emperor, but soon they would have a new name and a new purpose. In the aftermath, the palace gates were opened. The civil war that had raged began to die down as news spread that the tyrant was dead. Sebastian Thor, the visionary priest who had led the righteous rebellion, arrived on Terra not as a conqueror, but as a reformer. The High Lords, those that remained or were not complicit, acceded to Thor's moral authority. In a stunning and historically pivotal turn, Sebastian Thor was elevated to the position of ecclesiarch himself, the very office Vandire had so defiled. Thor initially refused such power, but it's said the Adeptus Custodes, perhaps acting on the Emperor's behalf yet again, strongly suggested he take up the mantle to heal the church he had saved, and so Thor did, becoming the new leader of the Imperium's faith. Now, Thor faced a delicate situation. Vandire's reign had shown the galaxy the danger of a militant, unchecked ecclesiarchy. The last thing anyone wanted was another despot with a fanatical army at his beck and call. In fact, in the rebellion's wake, there were widespread calls to dismantle the ecclesiarchy's military forces to prevent such tyranny from rising again. The High Lords issued a series of reforms, the most famous of which is the Decree Passive. This decree stated in essence that the ecclesiarchy shall have no men under arms. This was a direct response to Vandire's abuses. At the time, the church had whole warrior fraternities, like the Frateris Templar, Vandire's ravening fanatical infantry hordes, and considerable firepower. The decree passive aimed to strip the ecclesiarchy of its armies, ensuring the imperial church could never again field a force to rival the Astra Militarum or the Space Marines. Many expected that Thor, now ecclesiarch, would have to disband the very sisters who had unwittingly served the tyrant. But Sebastian Thor was a savvy man. He understood the spirit of the decree to curtail ecclesiarchal power. But he also recognized the value and need for a force of holy warriors who could defend the faithful and police the ecclesiarchy's own ranks. Thor had seen firsthand how close the Imperial Church came to destroying the Imperium from within. He likely thought, we need someone to keep an eye on ourselves to make sure this never happens again. And thus came a brilliant, if technically cheeky, solution. The decree forbade men under arms. Well then, it said nothing about women. Through that loophole, the newly humbled ecclesiarchy retained the group of warriors formerly known as the Brides of the Emperor. Rather than disband these devoted women, Sebastian Thor transformed them into a force for good, or at least for the proper defense of the faith. They would no longer serve a single corrupt master, but the imperial creed itself. They were reconstituted as the official military arm of the Adeptus Ministorum, the ecclesiarchy, under a new name, the Adepta Sororitas. In High Gothic, it means the sisterhood, reflecting both their gender and their quasi-monastic bond. In practice, these Adepta Sororitas would be the Sisters of Battle, enforcers of the faith, answerable to the ecclesiarch, and in theory to the emperor's ideals, rather than any one man's vanity. For the newly christened sisterhood, this was more than a bureaucratic loophole, it was a mandate. They became fiercely proud of their status as the ecclesiarchy's all-female champions. In fact, the Adepta Sororitas soon developed a culture of absolute exclusion of males from their ranks and even from their sanctuaries. No man could join the sisterhood, obviously, but beyond that, men were rarely even allowed inside the mighty convents on Terra or Ophelia 7, unless it was an extraordinary situation. Say, the ecclesiarch himself paying a formal visit, or a custodian on urgent business from the emperor. This wasn't mere reverse sexism or petty cloister rules. It was a direct reaction to the abuse of the past. The sisters felt that by keeping their order purely female, they were obeying both the letter and spirit of the decree. Passive, and ensuring that never again could the ecclesiarchy's army be turned to foul ends by the whims of a single corrupt man. In their view, They had been chosen by the Emperor to wield weapons in his name precisely because they were women. Over time, this became an article of faith in itself within the sisterhood. The Emperor's divine plan saved them from the folly of men with swords, so they, as women, must ever be the vigilant guardians of the faith. It's somewhat poetic, where the brides of Vandire had been led astray. The brides of the Emperor, as they saw themselves, would forevermore keep the faith pure. Thor, recognizing the need for the ecclesiarchy to have some kind of force and internal regulator, allowed them to remain even if the spirit of the decree was rather blatantly disregarded. For the sisterhood, this was more than a bureaucratic change. It was almost a rebirth. They fully embraced the decree's letter, proudly positioning themselves as the answer to "no men under arms." Indeed, to this day, the Adepta Sororitas consider their all-women composition sacrosanct. It is no coincidence that the sisters refer to each other as sisters in the most literal sense. Theirs is a bond of spiritual sisterhood that does not admit outsiders lightly. Men, even faithful servants of the Imperium, are generally forbidden from entering their cloisters except under extraordinary circumstances. There are tales of hapless administratum clerks turned away at the gate of a convent because the sisters inside simply pointed to the decree passive displayed on a banner above the door. This exclusivity is not born of vanity, but of purpose. The Sororitas know that they exist precisely because a man, Vandire, once led the ecclesiarchy astray, and they will ensure no man ever directly controls the Church's military arm again. In the Adepta Sororitas, the daughters of the Emperor answer only to him and his ordained ecclesiarchal superiors. An important distinction that has prevented many a potential repeat of the Age of Apostasy. Rebuilding and reorganization, the birth of the orders. In the years that followed the Age of Apostasy, the newly formed Adepta Sororitas had to rebuild trust and redefine their purpose. Under Sebastian Thor's enlightened guidance and that of his immediate successors, the sisterhood was structured in a way that would prevent any single person from wielding them as a personal army ever again. The sisters were to be the Emperor's obedient daughters, not the playthings of power-mad priests. One early move to that end was the establishment of two primary headquarters, or convents, for the sisterhood rather than one. The first and most hallowed is the Convent Prioris on Terra itself, right in the shadow of the Imperial Palace. The second is the Convent Sanctorum on the distant shrine world of Ophelia 7. Splitting the sisterhood's command between two locations introduced a healthy measure of decentralization. No single authority below the ecclesiarch could easily amass all the sisters in one grip. It also made practical sense. The galaxy is vast, and having two anchor points, one in the segmentum solar, one further out, allowed the sisters to respond to threats across Imperium space more effectively. Then came the idea to divide the sisterhood into separate autonomous organizations known as orders. Rather than one monolithic army of warrior women, there would be multiple orders, each with its own command hierarchy, patron saints, and traditions, all united by faith but distinct in character. This way, even if some future megalomaniac tried to manipulate the sisterhood, the orders might provide checks and balances against one another. Around the end of the 36th millennium, several decades after Vandire's fall, Ecclesiarch Alexis XXII, Sebastian Thor's successor, formalized this structure. He took the nascent Sororitas forces at each convent and split them into groups that would become the first orders militant of the Adepta Sororitas. At the Convent Prioris on Terra, two orders were founded, and at the Convent Sanctorum on Ophelia 7, two more, making 4 initial orders militant. These first orders were each led by one of the legendary 6 companions who had stood with Alicia Dominica in the Emperor's presence. Naturally, Alicia Dominica herself, the slayer of Vandire, became the leader of the order, based on Terra. Her order was named the Order of the Ebon Chalice, symbolizing a chalice filled with the Emperor's divine power, and perhaps alluding to the dark truth she had to drink when learning of Vandire's heresy. Dominica was the overall figurehead of the entire sisterhood at this time, revered as the matriarch or founder. It's said that she served as both a spiritual and military commander for years, setting the standard by which all future sisters would measure themselves. Meanwhile, at Terra's convent, another order took shape under Saint Silvana, one of Dominica's comrades. This became the Order of the Argent Shroud. Silvana was known for her quiet stoicism and sacrifice. In fact, she was the first of the companions to be martyred, and the shroud that covered her body after death turned silver as if marking her holiness. Her order's name reflects that sacred funeral shroud, symbolizing selfless service unto death. Far away on Ophelia 7, the fiery and indomitable Saint Catherine, the closest friend of Dominica, established her own order, originally called the Order of the Fiery Heart. Catherine was a bold warrior, and her personal emblem was a burning heart to signify fervent passion for the Emperor. Her leadership on Ophelia gave the sisterhood a powerful presence there, and her order was dedicated to a zealous, proactive eradication of heresy, much like Catherine herself, who was ever eager to carry the Emperor's light into dark places. Alongside Catherine on Ophelia 7 was Saint Lucia, a woman celebrated for her unshakable endurance and mournful, penitent spirit. Some accounts describe her as having a perpetually sorrowful gaze, as if burdened by the galaxy's sins. Lucia formed the Order of the Valorous Heart. The name captures her defining trait. Despite sorrow and pain, her heart knew only valor in service of the Emperor. The sisters of her order would come to emphasize endurance, sacrifice, and the purification of suffering through faith. So, by around the turn of Ea 37, the Adepta Sororitas boasted these four major orders: the Order of the Ebon Chalice, Terra, led by Dominica, exemplifying doctrinal purity and the original militant discipline of the sisterhood; the Order of the Argent Shroud, Terra, led by Silvana, emphasizing self-sacrifice and silent, relentless duty; the Order of the Fiery Heart, Ophelia 7, led by Catherine, burning with zeal and aggression in the Emperor's name; the Order of the Valorous Heart, Ophelia 7, led by Lucia, modeling stoic resilience and repentance. Each of these orders initially numbered in the thousands of sisters and quickly established reputations across the Imperium. As decades and centuries passed, they expanded, founding subsidiary bases, called preceptories, commanderies, or smaller missions, on various worlds to better respond to threats. Each founding saint eventually met her end. None of these women were immortal, after all, though they achieved extraordinary things in life. When they died, they were honored as great martyrs of the faith. They had been the Emperor's living saints, and in death they became the sisterhood's patron saints. Their relics, weapons, armor, even their bones, were preserved as holy items. One famous assemblage of such relics is the Triumph of Saint Catherine, a grand processional shrine that the sisters sometimes carry into particularly important battles or ceremonies. The Triumph consists of the preserved skeletal remains of Saint Catherine herself, borne aloft in an ornate reliquary coffin, surrounded by sacred artifacts representing each of the other founding saints: Dominica's blade, Silvana's shroud, Lucia's chaplet, Mina's rose emblem, and Arabella's tome, according to tradition. This solemn procession is carried by a select retinue of sisters from various orders, each chosen to embody the spirit of one of the 6 matriarchs marching forward with the triumph at their center. These sisters intone hymns even as war rages around them. It's said that the presence of the triumph can invigorate the faithful. With all 6 saints watching over them, how could they falter? And even those grievously wounded find strength to fight on. Enemies, on the other hand, often find the sight deeply unnerving. Imagine a funeral cortege advancing steadily through gunfire, stained glass icons glinting, incense billowing, all while an otherworldly calm seems to surround the relic bearers. Many heretics have broken at the sudden doubt that perhaps the Emperor truly walks among the Sororitas that day. In any case, the triumph of St. Catherine symbolizes what the sisterhood is ultimately fighting for: the undying spirit of their saints and the Emperor's grace carried forth, inspiring new generations of warriors. The successors they trained took up leadership of their respective orders, continuing their legacies. Dominica, Catherine, Silvana, and Lucia, all of whom had been declared living saints in their own lifetimes, performed legendary acts and led their orders in countless bloody victories. Each order developed its own traditions and subtleties, shaped by the personality of its foundress, but they all remained true to the core teachings that had begun on San Lior. Alicia Dominica, the greatest of them, passed on after a long life of service. She reportedly lived to see the sisterhood firmly cemented in its role. Upon her death, the ecclesiarchy created the formal office of Abbess of the Adepta Sororitas, a singular leader for the entire sisterhood when needed. The first to hold the title of Abbess was not Dominica, she was gone, but one of her companions outside the original 6, a sister named Palmiro, from an order Dialogos, known as the Order of the Holy Word. This was a sign that the ecclesiarchy intended the sororitas to govern themselves with some autonomy. An abbess would coordinate the orders but also answer to the ecclesiarch. In practice, though, for a long time, the abbess was more a spiritual figurehead, if she existed at all, because the major orders were quite independent in day-to-day matters. One of the most significant changes in the early sisterhood came after the death of Saint Catherine. Catherine, who had been leading the Order of the Fiery Heart, was tragically martyred. The story goes that she fell in battle against a particularly dire foe, a chaos witch cult known as the Cult of Menesteus. Catherine died heroically, and her loss was deeply felt. In her honor, the Order of the Fiery Heart was renamed the Order of Our Martyred Lady. This name reflected not just Catherine's sacrifice, but the broader philosophy that martyrdom in the Emperor's service is the highest honor. The Order of Our Martyred Lady, its armor repainted black in mourning with red linings to signify spilled blood, became synonymous with vengeful zeal. These sisters would fight with furious devotion to live up to their martyred patron's example. That still left 2 of Dominica's original companions without orders named for them: Mina and Arabella, the 2 sisters who also witnessed the Emperor's revelation and helped end Vandire. For some time, those 2 served in other capacities. In fact, a tradition arose that a small elite bodyguard of the abbess of the Adepta Sororitas, or even of the ecclesiarch himself at times, would consist of sisters inspired by Mina and Arabella's legacy, keeping their spirit alive. It wasn't until the mid-38th millennium, about 2,500 years after the Age of Apostasy, that the ecclesiarchy decided to establish 2 more major orders militant, thus bringing the total to the 6 we know today. In 878 M38, Ecclesiarch Deasis VI founded the Order of the Bloody Rose in honor of Saint Mina, and the Order of the Sacred Rose in honor of Saint Arabella. Saint Mina's legacy was one of ferocity and unyielding wrath against the enemies of the faith. Descriptions of Mina depict her as somewhat grim and brooding, but absolutely deadly when roused to anger. An apocryphal tale claims that during the Siege of Terra, Mina personally dueled one of the custodians in a misunderstanding, fighting him to a standstill before words of an alliance were finally spoken. True or not, it's a cherished legend among the sisters, reflecting Mina's fearless martial pride. Mina ultimately met her end ambushed by a chaos cult. When her fellow sisters found her body, the entire shrine was littered with the corpses of cultists she had slain in her final moments. Such was the bloody final vision of Saint Mina. Fittingly, the Order of the Bloody Rose carries forward her fervor. They adorn their armor in deep red and black, and they believe in absolute, merciless prosecution of the Emperor's justice. Many say the Sisters of the Bloody Rose never waste time with half measures or negotiations. They strike first, strike hard, and let the Emperor sort the rest out. Mercy to them is a luxury for after the war is won. On the other hand, Saint Arabella was known as the Liberator and remembered for a steadfast, calming presence. Her approach complemented Mina's fury. Arabella was resolute and even-tempered, a warrior who fought with disciplined precision and who offered comfort and hope to the oppressed. The Order of the Sacred Rose, named for her, reflects Arabella's virtues of discipline and purity of purpose. These sisters wear armor of ivory white trimmed with black, like petals of a white rose. They are renowned for their unshakable morale and marksmanship. In battle, Sacred Rose Sisters chant hymns methodically and fire in disciplined volleys, standing their ground where others might falter. If the bloody rose is the roaring blaze, the Sacred Rose is the steady candle that never extinguishes, even in the fiercest storm. Notably, Sacred Rose Sisters are also known for being compassionate in victory. After a battle, they are among the orders most likely to tend to the wounded and offer solace to survivors, once the heretics are slain, of course. They have the heart of benevolent guardians, albeit completely ruthless against the wicked. With the addition of the Orders of the Bloody Rose and the Sacred Rose, the Adepta Sororitas now had 6 major orders militant, each tied to one of the founding saints from the Age of Apostasy. These 6 remain the most famed and influential branches of the sisterhood to this day. Order of the Ebon Chalice, oldest of all, founded by Saint Alicia Dominica. They pride themselves on adhering strictly to the original teachings and ceremonies of the sisterhood. If you want to see the pure, unaltered traditions passed down from Dominica herself, look to the Ebon Chalice. They consider themselves the exemplar that all other orders aspire to. It's often said that an Ebon Chalice sister's faith is as unyielding as adamantium. They emphasize rote ritual and discipline, constant prayer, precise observance of doctrine, and maintaining the holiest standard of equipment and dress in battle. They fight with coordinated, unwavering formation. Each action almost a prayer in itself. Their colors are black armor and white vestments, a stark and somber look befitting their seriousness and their role as the keepers of the faith's purity. Order of Our Martyred Lady, the largest order in modern times, and perhaps the most widely recognized, partly because their color scheme of black armor with red trim is iconic. It's the scheme often depicted in art and on codex covers. Their patron, Saint Catherine, exemplified self-sacrifice. This order venerates martyrdom. They truly believe that to die for the emperor is the highest honor, and conversely that surviving when one's sisters have fallen is a call to seek ever greater deeds to earn a worthy end. Sisters of the Martyred Lady often paint their armor black in mourning for the countless martyrs who have gone before, and they bear red insignia to symbolize the blood of those saints. In battle, they have a tendency to become even more zealous when they take losses. The more sisters fall, the more fiercely the survivors fight. Many a desperate last stand has been led by a sister of Our Martyred Lady, tearfully chanting war prayers as she avenges her fallen squadmates. Their creed, every blow struck after a sister dies, is struck in that sister's memory. So let it be twice as devastating. Order of the Valorous Heart. These sisters, following St. Lucia's example, put a special focus on penitence and endurance. They often practice rites of mortification, like wearing hair shirts or bearing scars, to remind themselves of the emperor's sacrifice and the burden of sin. Their armor is primarily black, like the martyred ladies, but usually with white accents or robes. A valorous heart sister might seem dour or cold, but in truth she is burning with inner devotion. She just channels it into stoic resilience rather than battle frenzy. They are the ones who will hold the line no matter what, unwilling to yield even a step, because enduring hardship is a form of worship for them. There's a saying, "A sister of the valorous heart has already suffered more in training than you could ever do to her in battle." They turn pain into spiritual strength. This order's demeanor is solemn. They rarely celebrate victory except by offering prayers of atonement for those who died along the way. Order of the Argent Shroud. Inspired by Saint Silvana, this order values selfless service without recognition. They often fight as fast strike forces, moving swiftly and hitting the enemy hard before the foe can react. The image of an Argent Shroud sister is of a silent angel of death, appearing, dealing judgment with bolter or blade, and moving on, all without fanfare. They have a tradition of not speaking of their past deeds, letting history alone judge their worth. Their armor is a shining silver. Argent means silver, after all, with white or gray robes and black details. There's a ghostly motif often attributed to them, perhaps because Silvana died so early and mysteriously. Some say her image was imprinted on her death shroud as a ghostly form. In battle, an Argent Shroud unit is adaptable and swift. They prefer to outmaneuver their opponents and strike at critical points, even if it means acting without waiting for orders. They trust in each sister's initiative and faith. Also notable, since Silvana was the first martyr, some Argent Shroud ceremonies quietly honor the unnamed and unsung heroes of the sisterhood, those who die with no glory except the Emperor's thanks. Order of the Bloody Rose, honoring Saint Mina's fierceness. These sisters have a well-earned reputation for aggression. They go into battle like wrath incarnate. Many favor close combat weapons like chainswords or brutal two-handed eviscerator blades, wanting to be as direct as possible in delivering the Emperor's judgment. Their armor is blood red with black vestments, and their symbol a red rose splattered with blood drops, often depicted with thorns or crossed blades. The Order of the Bloody Rose believes that swift, brutal action is the truest path to vanquishing evil, because any hesitation or mercy only gives the heretic time to repent, and they believe a heretic doesn't deserve that time unless the Emperor himself wills it. They are not mindless berserkers, they remain disciplined sisters, but they ride the razor's edge of righteous fury. A canoness of the Bloody Rose famously wrote the Thorn Treatise after a particularly grim campaign, concluding that mercy is a temptation, better to snuff it out and spare the faithful further suffering. That pretty much captures their philosophy. No pity. Order of the Sacred Rose. Following Saint Arabella's model, these sisters are known for their calm and unwavering faith. They chant litanies in harmonious unison, even amid bombardments. It is said that a line of Sacred Rose sisters will hold their positions like statues, firing with immaculate precision, utterly unshaken by whatever horrors or losses occur around them. Their armor is pure white, symbolizing the unsullied rose of their faith, often with black or gold trim. They cherish beauty and devotion. Their cloisters echo with choir hymns, and their battle chants have an almost musical quality. Sacred Rose battle strategy often emphasizes defense and disciplined volleys of fire. They don't charge impulsively, they advance methodically, with the certainty that the Emperor is guiding every shot. Sacred Rose sisters also have a reputation for optimism in the face of despair, a rare trait in the 41st millennium. They truly embody the phrase, "Faith is our shield." They are unyielding not only in body, but in spirit, and that serenity can be terrifying to an enemy who expected to see fear in human eyes and finds none. Different as these orders militant may be in personality and style, they are united in their fundamental purpose, to serve the Emperor's will and uphold the imperial creed. All of them adhere to the core tenets of the ecclesiarchy. They just each excel in their own approach to holy war, and each cherishes its own saints and heroes. Beyond these 6 major orders, over the centuries, the sisterhood also founded numerous smaller orders, the so-called lesser orders militant or orders minoris. These often sprang from one of the main orders. For example, a group of sisters from the Order of the Sacred Rose might distinguish themselves on a distant frontier world and later decide, with ecclesiarchal approval, to establish a permanent presence there as a new minor order with its own name. Typically, such orders minoris honor some local martyr or miracle and take a name reflecting a specific mission or shrine. While the major orders have tens of thousands of sisters each, a minor order might have only a few hundred or a couple of thousand, focused in one sector or subsector of the galaxy. They extend the reach of the sisterhood to far-flung regions and specialized tasks. There are dozens of such minor orders, for instance, the Order of the Ermine Mantle or the Order of the Argent Shroud, not to be confused with the major Argent Shroud, but listing them all would take ages. Suffice to say, wherever a prolonged need for the sisters' presence arose, an order could bud into existence. They all ultimately answer up the chain to their parent convent, and by extension to the abbess and ecclesiarch. Now, it's worth mentioning that not every member of the Adepta Sororitas is a power-armored, frontline battle sister. The sisterhood actually encompasses a variety of orders beyond the militant ones. Collectively, all sororitas, militant and otherwise, share the same fundamental training and piety, but those who don't go to war in the battle lines have other vital roles. The orders Hospitaller are the healers and physicians of the sisterhood. These sisters hospitaller run hospitals, aid the poor, and accompany imperial armies to provide medical and spiritual aid on the battlefield. On countless worlds, the Hospitallers are known as compassionate angels of mercy, albeit ones who still pray fiercely as they work and aren't afraid to fight if their patients are threatened. They have saved untold lives, often so those lives can continue to serve the Emperor's cause. Yet even their mercy has limits. They do not suffer heretics or the impure. A Hospitaller may tenderly bandage a wounded guardsman one moment, then turn and deliver the Emperor's judgment to a deranged cultist in the next. Their appearance is usually a subdued version of the sister's habit, often with white robes or aprons bearing the symbol of a red cross or chalice. Many a soldier's last sight has been a Hospitaller leaning over him, reciting the Emperor's blessing as he slips away, a kinder end than most in the 41st millennium. The Order's dialogues are scholars and linguists. A sister dialogist devotes herself to translating ancient texts, deciphering forbidden dialects, and preserving the Imperium's store of holy and historical knowledge. They serve as translators and advisors. For instance, if an inquisitor uncovers a heretical tome in some long-dead language, a dialogist can likely read it carefully through scroll filters and sanctified goggles, of course, to glean its secrets. They also help bridge communication in the far-flung Imperium, translating the imperial creed into the myriad local languages of isolated human cultures. Some have even studied Xenos languages, under strict inquisitorial sanction, to better understand the enemy's lies and subvert them. Often, a dialogist sister will accompany an inquisitor's retinue as a sage. She carries no heavy weapon, maybe just a las pistol and an old leather journal, but her sharp mind is as much a weapon as any bolter when it comes to unraveling conspiracies and demonic incantations. Many in the Ordo, Hereticus, consider the Order's dialogues to be their behind-the-scenes allies, waging the war for humanity's soul in libraries and scriptoria. The Order's Famulus perform a very different duty. They are part diplomat, part governess, part spy. These Sisters Famulus embed themselves within the households of the nobility and the powerful across the Imperium. Ostensibly, they serve as advisors on matters of faith and etiquette to high-born families. In reality, they keep a close eye on the political elite and subtly steer them towards loyalty and piety. A famulus sister might arrange a marriage between two rival noble houses to quell a feud, a bit of holy matchmaking for the good of the Imperium, or gently counsel a young planetary governor to curb his extravagant tendencies and perhaps donate to the local shrine instead of building another pleasure garden. By their mere presence, they remind the upper classes that they ultimately answer to the Emperor's moral laws. They've headed off many a potential rebellion by identifying disloyalty in a courtier's heart and quashing it with a well-placed word, or, if needed, a quiet dose of poison in a heretic's wine. The Famulus are as much about nurturing alliances as they are about nipping treachery in the bud. And there are even more esoteric branches. Orders Sabine accompany the Missionarius Galaxia, the Imperial missionaries, to newly rediscovered worlds, helping to integrate primitive societies by gently introducing them to the Imperial Creed, often by becoming one with the community and guiding them from within. The Orders Pronatus specialize in locating, retrieving, and safeguarding holy relics and artifacts. Think of them as archaeologist nuns who secure everything from saintly bones to lost standard template constructs, ensuring such items don't fall into the wrong hands. The Orders Dialogus we covered. The Orders Hospitaller we covered. There are even orders, like the Orders Maduriga, who provide ecclesiastical choir singers for holy occasions, and Orders Vespila, who specialize in funeral rites and the consecration of graves. They are sometimes called the Dark Sisters because they handle the remains of the faithful, ensuring they're properly sanctified, essentially. The Adepta Sororitas has a hand in every aspect of maintaining the spiritual health of the Imperium. However, the Orders Militant, the Sisters of Battle, remain the poster children and the literal sword and shield of the sisterhood. They are what most people picture when they think of the Adepta Sororitas. Women in power armor, clutching bolt guns and rosaries, flak boots striding through ashes, voices raised in zealous chorus. The sisterhood's influence ultimately derives from the fearsome reputation of these battle sisters who prove through action that the ecclesiarchy's faith is far from hollow. Though the sororitas maintain a formal rank structure, abbess at the very top, then prioresses heading the main convents, then canoness, superiors leading each order, on down through canonesses, who command smaller detachments or missions, and sisters superior, squad leaders to the rank-and-file sisters and novices. In truth, what matters most is the quality of one's faith and deeds. A veteran sister with no title at all can be as revered as any officer if she embodies the Emperor's virtues. Many canonesses lead from the front, setting an example of piety and courage rather than merely directing from the rear. Promotions in the sisterhood are as much about spiritual fortitude as tactical acumen. Tales abound of sisters who, through extraordinary acts, such as holding a shrine single-handedly against a horde of mutants, were elevated to lead entire preceptories. But to the sisters, titles are secondary. Every one of them, from the humblest hospitaller apprentice to the abbess herself, considers servant of the Emperor to be the only honor that truly matters. We've laid out their origins and how they're organized. Now it's time to see the Adepta Sororitas in action. Wars, crusades, and legendary deeds that have defined their legacy over the millennia. Wars and crusades, a legacy, written in blood and fire. From the moment of their founding, the Sisters of Battle proved that their faith was far from merely ceremonial. It was a force that could topple heresy and forge legends on the battlefield. In the centuries after Sebastian Thor's reforms, the Adepta Sororitas took part in numerous conflicts to stabilize the Imperium and cleanse the lingering stains of the Age of Apostasy. One of the earliest major tests of the reformed sisterhood came soon after Vandire's fall, in a crisis known as the Plague of Unbelief. In the wake of Thor's ascension, not all of the Imperium's troubles vanished. Far from it. An ambitious clergyman, Cardinal Bucharest of Gathalamor, broke away and formed a separatist empire, twisting the imperial creed to his own ends much as Vandire had. This plague of doctrinal rebellion spread through the Segmentum Pacificus, threatening another large-scale civil war. The Sisters of Battle, newly organized and eager to prove their loyalty to the true faith, marched alongside other imperial forces to put an end to Bucharest's rebellion. They besieged his strongholds, rallied the fearful citizens back to the emperor's truth, and assured everyone, with bolter and flamer in hand, that there would be no second Vandire. Ultimately, Bucharest was defeated. Legend says he met a particularly grisly end at the hands of Confessor Dolin Kairosius, who confronted the false cardinal personally. In any case, the Sororitas earned great renown in this victory, showing the galaxy that the ecclesiarchy's militant arm was now a guardian of purity, not a source of terror. Throughout the later millennia, whenever the ecclesiarchy declared a war of faith, the Sisters of Battle were at the forefront. These wars of faith were essentially grand crusades, holy expeditions sanctioned by the ecclesiarch to liberate worlds from heresy, reclaim lost relics, or re-establish the imperial creed in lawless regions. For example, in M37 and M38, a number of wars of faith surged into areas like the Eastern Fringe, accompanied by hordes of zealous pilgrims and ragtag faithful militia. The Sisters acted as the elite core of these forces, the steel spine ensuring the crusades didn't dissolve into mere mobs. They would strike at the biggest threats, be it a witch king leading a planet astray or a Xenos cult corrupting a hive city, decapitating the leadership of heresies so that the masses of the faithful could sweep in and finish the job. The mere rumor that Sisters were en route caused many a false prophet's followers to lose heart and scatter. Internal policing was also a key part of the Sisterhood's early centuries. The ecclesiarchy, vast and influential, is unfortunately always at some risk of corruption from within. Many a time, a planetary governor or even a high-ranking cardinal began to dabble in proscribed rituals or amass power in blasphemous ways. The mere whisper of ecclesiarchal clergy falling to heresy would prompt a deployment of sororitas to investigate and, if necessary, execute summary judgment. It's said that in these times the appearance of black-armored battle sisters at a diocesan palace put the fear of the emperor into even the most pious bishops. A healthy fear, mind you, the kind that keeps one honest. The sisters became both sword and scalpel, rooting out sin with methodical precision. One apocryphal account tells of an entire congregation on Trinitas Fourth that had been infiltrated by a chaos cult masquerading as priests. An order of the valorous Heartstrike team infiltrated their cathedral during midnight mass and in a swift, blistering attack, purged every corrupted clergyman in the building. The next day, the remaining citizens attended an unexpectedly short service and discovered their priests mysteriously absent, save for the lingering scent of incense and promethium in the air. As the centuries rolled on, the Adepta Sororitas spread their influence to countless worlds. They established fortress convents on any planet deemed particularly sacred or strategic. These could range from massive basilicas in bustling hive cities to secluded mountain monasteries on quiet shrine moons. Wherever they settled, two things were sure to follow. The local populace would develop an intense devotion to the emperor. How could they not, with warrior-nuns parading holy relics through the streets regularly? And any lurking heretical elements would either flee or face fiery extermination. A world with a sororitas convent was generally a world that towed the imperial line very strictly. The 39th and 40th millennia saw their share of conflicts involving the sisters. A few bear mentioning to illustrate the breadth of their campaigns. On the planet Dimamar, famed for being Sebastian Thor's homeworld and burial site, a renegade sect arose centuries after Thor's death, and canonization they twisted Thor's teachings and, in an ironic heresy, began to worship Thor himself as a god distinct from the emperor. This, of course, was anathema. Thor would have been horrified at such blasphemy. The Order of the Valorous Heart took it upon themselves to extinguish this cult. In a somber campaign, they descended on Dimamar's holy sites, tearfully but firmly putting down those deluded souls who sought to idolize Thor in the wrong way. They did it as an act of purification, believing they were saving the soul of Thor's legacy by preventing a perversion of his creed. It is said that the sisters went into battle singing a dirge for the fallen, mourning that it had come to this even as they pressed triggers and swung blades. When it was over, they declared 40 days of penance for the planet, not to punish, but to cleanse spiritually what had transpired. Dimamar remains deeply loyal to the Emperor to this day, a bastion of the faith, thanks in no small part to the Sororitas intervention. In the early 41st millennium, a massive orc war, a great rampaging crusade of orcs, threatened several systems near the galactic south. Although fighting aliens isn't the Sororitas' primary charter, they prefer torching heretics over Xenos. The orcs were trampling over countless human colonies. Something had to be done. The Order of the Argent Shroud answered the call alongside Imperial Guard regiments. On the desert world of Areth, the sisters laid an ambush for the orc war boss. They prayed for guidance, then under cover of a manufactured sandstorm. Some say their chanting even stirred the winds. They struck at night. The next morning, the orcs found their war boss's head mounted atop a dune like a grisly totem, and leaderless, the greenskin horde fractured and was mopped up. The local guardsmen were astonished, dubbing it the miracle of the Ashen Storm. To this day, they swear they heard a chorus of female voices on the wind during that night of slaughter. During the Palatine Schism, a ferocious sectarian rebellion that flared up in the Segmentum Pacificus in the mid-M38, a lowly sister Repentia named Celestine achieved what can only be described as a miraculous ascension. Celestine had been fighting as part of a larger crusade against tens of thousands of heretics. At one critical battle outside the besieged city of Eurytion, Celestine alone cut down over 100 mutant and traitor warriors before being mortally wounded. She was carried off the field as if dead. But by dawn, astonishingly, Celestine rose from what should have been her deathbed, her grievous wounds completely healed. Taking this as a divine sign, the ecclesiarchal commanders bestowed upon her revered relics, including the legendary armor of Saint Catherine and a glowing blade called the Ardent Blade. Transformed and empowered by faith, Celestine led a renewed offensive, what came to be called the Palatine Crusade, and delivered victory after victory. Her presence invigorated not just the sisters, but all Imperial troops. Many swore they saw a golden aura around her in battle. In the end, the heretical forces were utterly vanquished, and Celestine was proclaimed a living saint by the acclaim of all. After the crusade, Celestine vanished mysteriously, as saints often do, appearing only in times of great need. But the legend of the Angel of the Palatine spread across the Imperium, preparing the faithful to recognize her should she ever return, which, as we know now, she eventually did, centuries later, to aid humanity in one of its darkest hours. But for all the tales of triumph, the Sisterhood's history has had its share of bitter sacrifices and tragedies as well. Perhaps one of the most significant and instructive in terms of the wider Imperium was the disaster at Sanctuary 101. This was a remote convent outpost of the Order of Our Martyred Lady, established on a barren world far out on the eastern fringe. In the year 897 NEM41, Sanctuary 101 became the site of the first confirmed open contact between the Imperium and the ancient Xenos, known as the Necrons. The Necrons, undying machine warriors from a long-forgotten age, emerged unexpectedly from the sands around the convent. The sisters stationed there, only a few dozen at the time, mounted a fierce defense. They barricaded the convent gates, recited the litany of the Eternal Shield, and unleashed everything from bolter fire to heavy flamers at the implacable, skeletal Necron warriors advancing on them. The battle was desperate. These machines did not falter under holy flame or blessed bolts. They just kept coming, some reassembling themselves after seeming to fall. Ultimately, communications from Sanctuary 101 fell silent. When reinforcements and inquisitorial agents finally arrived, they found the convent in ruins and every sister dead. It was a solemn scene. The chapel was desecrated, the altar shattered, and the bodies of the sisters were found ritually laid out, their armor stripped and, horrifically, their flesh flayed from their bones by the Necrons' depraved science. It became clear this wasn't just a loss, it was a martyrdom. The Sisters of Sanctuary 101 had fought to the last breath against an enemy no one fully understood yet, becoming the first martyrs in humanity's struggle against the Necrons. They died with prayers on their lips. Auto records later recovered had snippets of Voxcaster transmissions of hymns amid the gunfire, and they managed to transmit fragmentary picked recordings of the attackers before the end. This gave the Imperium crucial intelligence about the Necron threat, namely that it existed and was terrifying. The sacrifice of Sanctuary 101's garrison ensured the Imperium was not caught completely off guard by future Necron incursions. Importantly, the Sororitas did not let this loss go unremembered. 12 years later, Canoness Sephirina of the Order of Our Martyred Lady led a mission back to Sanctuary 101 to reconsecrate the site and recover the bones of the fallen. In doing so, they stirred up another Necron attack, but this time the sisters came prepared and in force. In a hard-fought engagement, they actually succeeded in temporarily routing the Necrons and even destroyed a Necron tomb complex. Beneath the moon of Sanctuary 101 was re-sanctified, its chapel rebuilt, and the names of the martyrs etched into a new marble altar. Although ominously, during the nightmare across the galaxy that accompanied the Great Rift's opening, it's said the Necrons returned once more to that accursed site. The war against the Undying is never truly over. Still, that initial reconquest was a moral victory and a testament to the Sisterhood's resolve. They will return to the very jaws of hell to honor their fallen and defy the enemies of the Emperor. If Necrons were one shocking new foe the sisters encountered, another crisis of the 41st millennium involved a more diabolical enemy from within, chaos, in one of its most catastrophic invasions. This culminated in the event known as the 13th Black Crusade, launched by Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos. The main target was the fortress world of Cadia, the linchpin of Imperial defenses against the Eye of Terror. The fighting on Cadia was apocalyptic, and the Sisters of Battle were very much present, fighting and dying alongside the Imperial Guard, Space Marines, Titan Legions, and other defenders. It was during the climax of this campaign in 999 M41 that one of the most awe-inspiring miracles of the age occurred, the return of Saint Celestine. We touched on Celestine's earlier rise during the Palatine Crusade, but here she truly became a savior figure to the Imperium. As Cadia's skies burned with hellfire and the ground split under the weight of Chaos's onslaught, Celestine appeared at the head of a long-lost fleet of reinforcements. Thousands of battle sisters, thought to have been swallowed by a warp storm centuries prior, translated out of the immaterium above Cadia, guided, it is said, by Celestine's divine light. They made planetfall right into the thick of battle, the living saint at their forefront like a blazing comet. Witnesses recount how Celestine's arrival buoyed the flagging Imperial forces. This golden-armored figure with 6 angelic wings descended amid the rubble of a breached basilica, her blade, the ardent blade, wreathed in holy fire, cutting through traitor marines and demons with equal ease. Around her, Sisters of Battle rallied, singing the hymn Ave Imperator, such that even guardsmen and space marines found themselves joining the chorus. Celestine personally confronted Abaddon's demonic lieutenants, and in one notable clash, she struck down a monstrous demon prince, shattering its essence back to the warp. Perhaps even more astonishing, Celestine demonstrated the power to grant miracles to others. 2 canonesses who fought by her side on Cadia, Eleanor of the Order of the Ebon Chalice and Genevieve of the Martyred Lady, fell in battle protecting Celestine from a horde of Black Legion Chaos Space Marines. Celestine knelt by their bodies and prayed. Moments later, before the eyes of friend and foe alike, the 2 fallen sisters drew breath again, rising fully healed and shining with holy light. They had been resurrected by the saint's faith. From that moment on, they became her devoted bodyguards, known as the Gemini Superia. This resurrection miracle sent waves of terror through the Chaos ranks. If their corpse god grants them this power, how can we slay them? Panicked some, and conversely instilled unshakable courage in the defenders. Indeed, battle brothers of the Space Marines bowed their heads in reverence as the 2 restored sisters joined Celestine in pushing back the foe. Despite these heroics, the 13th Black Crusade's outcome was bittersweet. The planet Cadia could not be saved. Abaddon, in a final act of spite, crashed a blackstone fortress into the world, breaking it apart. Celestine and many Imperials escaped as the surface cracked and fire consumed the planet. In the aftermath, Celestine took charge of leading survivors, including the tech archaeologist Belisarius Cawl, Inquisitor Greyfax of the Ordo Hereticus, Marshal Marius Amalrich of the Black Templars, and many battle sisters, on a perilous journey. Following a prophetic vision, Celestine guided this caravan of the faithful through chaos-infested space to a hidden webway portal, and with the help of uneasy allies, Craftworld Eldar and the Harlequins, who believed Celestine to be pivotal in some cosmic prophecy, they made their way to Macragge, realm of the Ultramarines. On Macragge, events continued to unfold rapidly. It was there that Belisarius Cawl and Greyfax, with Eldar aid, managed to resurrect the Ultramarines' Primarch, Robut Guilliman, who had been in stasis since being mortally wounded in the Horus Heresy. Saint Celestine stood by as Guilliman awoke from his 10,000-year slumber, acting almost like a guarantor of the Emperor's will in this moment. One can only imagine Guilliman's first sight upon revival, a living saint, haloed in light, welcoming him back to the realm of the living, and to an Imperium in dire need of salvation. Celestine then accompanied Guilliman on his Terran crusade, an odyssey across a demon-riddled galaxy to return the Primarch to Holy Terra. They braved unimaginable dangers together, at one point even fighting their way through the demon world of a Primarch-turned-demon, Magnus the Red. Throughout these trials, Celestine was instrumental in keeping the faith of those around her. If a space marine, genetically bred to know no fear, might falter in those hellish environs, a simple glance at Celestine's serene, beatific determination stiffened their resolve. Many said that where Celestine tread, the Emperor's own spirit must surely have been present. Eventually, Guilliman did reach Terra and took up the mantle of Lord Commander of the Imperium. Celestine, her mission for the moment fulfilled, slipped away to continue doing the Emperor's work wherever darkness reigns. She doesn't linger for accolades. One day she's at the Eternity Gate on Terra, kneeling before the Golden Throne. The next, she's gone, reported in 3 systems over, leading a relief force to some besieged shrine world. Such is the way of saints. They arrive when needed and depart when the miracle is done. In the wake of Guilliman's return and the cataclysmic birth of the Great Rift, the galaxy-spanning warp storm that split the Imperium in half after Cadia's fall, the Adepta Sororitas found themselves needed as never before, the period known as the Noctis Aeterna. When the Astronomican's light was obscured and the galaxy was plunged into literal and spiritual darkness, saw widespread panic and a spike in heresy. Whole populations, feeling abandoned by the Emperor, lost hope or turned to dark alternatives. In those black nights, the sisters shone as beacons of faith. They launched numerous wars of faith in the early 42nd millennium, especially in the embattled half of the galaxy now called Imperium Nihilus, the Dark Imperium, cut off from Terra's light. Sisters of Battle became the rallying point on worlds where morale was crumbling. For example, on the industrial world of Kesria, as demonic legions overran the continents and the sky was rent by warp storms, an outnumbered group of sororitas from the Order of the Sacred Rose held the planet's last bastion, a grand cathedral. Against all odds, their canoness had them form a living ring of steel on the cathedral steps, refugees huddled behind them, and they sang the hymn Illuminatus for hours on end, without pause. As they fought amazingly, the demons faltered at this bulwark of purity. Reinforcements, legend says an enigmatic band of Legion of the Damned Space Marines, finally arrived, finding every sister bloodied but still standing, still singing, and not a single demon alive within the cathedral's precincts. The sight became known as the Miracle of the Lantern, an example that spread via astropathic relay to other systems. Do not give up hope. The Emperor's angels are among you. It was during this crucible of new wars that Morvenn Vahl rose to prominence. Robute Guilliman, reorganizing the Imperium's leadership, recognized the value and loyalty of the Adepta Sororitas. After all, he had seen Celestine's impact and knew the Sororitas had been holding many regions together in the darkness. The High Lords of Terra had long not included an abbess of the Sororitas, partly because the position was vacant since the disappearance of one abbess decades prior, and partly due to old tradition since the Age of Apostasy. But Guilliman changed that. He appointed Sister Morvenn Vahl as the new Abbess Sanctorum of the Adepta Sororitas, and granted her a seat among the High Lords. This was a watershed moment. The sisters now had direct representation in the Imperium's ruling council, formalizing their voice at the highest level for the first time in millennia. Morvenn Vahl was a distinguished Celestian from the Order of the Argent Shroud. Noted for her strategic brilliance and personal courage, she had led numerous successful campaigns against Chaos warbands in the years prior. Yet even as she assumed one of the loftiest offices in the Imperium, Morvenn did something somewhat unexpected for a newly minted High Lord. She went right back to the front lines, clad in a master-crafted Paragon warsuit, a towering exoskeletal armor that turns a sister into a walking engine of destruction. Morvenn Vahl personally spearheaded assaults during the Indomitus Crusade, Guilliman's grand campaign to restabilize and reclaim Imperial territories after the Great Rift's opening. Many on Terra were shocked that a High Lord would risk herself in battle, but Morvenn reportedly brushed off such concerns, saying that leading by example was the purest way to inspire the faithful. With her massive spear, the Spear of Faith, in hand and a relic shield upon her warsuit, she skewered a greater demon of Khorne during the purge of Gathalamor. And on another occasion, she and a cohort of sisters held off an entire warband of the Emperor's children, Chaos Space Marines, attempting to seize a shrine world. Her battlefield heroics quickly silenced any critics who thought a woman of the cloth had no place directing the fate of the Imperium. Under Morvenn Vahl's stewardship, the Adepta Sororitas have only grown stronger. The sisters received new equipment and reinforcements as Forge worlds sympathetic to the faith, and perhaps nudged by Guilliman's influence, provided them improved arms and armor. The introduction of units like the Paragon warsuits, smaller versions of Morvenn's own Golden War armor, gave the orders more punch against heavy targets. And yet, the spirit of the sisterhood remains the same as it was in the time of Alicia Dominica: absolute devotion. Morvenn herself often invokes Dominica's name in her war speeches, reminding every sister that they carry the legacy of those 6 matriarchs from the throne room into each battle. The Sororitas, for their part, carry themselves with a certain righteous pride. There's an old saying quietly shared among some Imperial Guard officers, out of earshot of any commissar or confessor, mind you. If you want something purged right, send in the sisters. They'll even make the Space Marines look lax. In truth, the Adepta Sororitas have at times evoked a mix of admiration and uneasy awe from their Astartes counterparts. One Black Templar's marshal, a warrior from an equally zealous Space Marine chapter, reportedly commented that the Sisters of Battle were too fervent for their own good. When this remark reached the ear of a canoness, she coolly replied, "Better too much zeal than too little, son of Dawn." It's said the marshal had no answer to that. Even the superhuman angels of death know that when it comes to raw, unbridled devotion, the Sisters of Battle set a standard few can match. Not all sacrifices are forced upon the sisters by enemies. Sometimes, in the cruel calculus of the Imperium, they themselves become sacrifices to uphold a higher duty. In one exceptional secret incident, after a hellish campaign that saw a demon Primarch defeated at terrible cost, a campaign from which only a handful of Imperial Guard, Sororitas, and the secretive Grey Knight Space Marines walked away alive, the Inquisition concluded that knowledge of what transpired had to be purged to protect the masses from panic and heresy. This directive was absolute. All who knew the truth were to be silenced. The surviving guardsmen were mind-wiped or shipped off to distant penal colonies. As for the Sisters of Battle who bore witness, they faced an unthinkable ultimatum: submit to execution to maintain the secret, or become potential liabilities to the very Imperium they served. True to their creed, the sisters did not flinch. They gathered together in prayer one final time, and then willingly, stoically, met their fate by the Inquisition's hand. It's said that in their final moments, they sang a psalm of martyrdom, voices steady and devout, even as the bolter shells fell upon them. They became martyrs not in battle against the foe, but in service to the terrible necessities of the Imperium's bureaucracy. Few know of this dark chapter. It remains sealed in forbidden records. But within the sisterhood, it is remembered with somber pride. These sisters proved that their loyalty and obedience to the Emperor's will, as delivered through his authorized agents, transcended even their own survival. They died keeping a secret so that billions of others might continue living in ignorant safety. It is a sacrifice as profound as any made on the battlefield, and it underscores that for the Adepta Sororitas, no price is too high to pay for the Emperor. Even rarer, though, are the times when a sororitas falls in a less noble way, succumbing to actual heresy. It's almost unheard of. There have been vanishingly few such instances, but one stands as a cautionary tale. The case of Sister Miriael Sabathiel of the Order of Our Martyred Lady. She is, to date, the only recorded Sister of Battle to have willingly turned to chaos. Miriael was captured by the Emperor's Children, a Chaos Space Marine legion devoted to the depraved god Slanesh. In captivity, something within her twisted. Perhaps it was prolonged torture breaking her spirit, or some latent weakness of the soul. And she not only broke, but swore herself to Slanesh's service, becoming a heretic and a blasphemer of the worst kind. By the time she escaped or was recovered, she had fully forsaken her vows and eventually emerged as a warband leader in the service of the Dark Prince, reveling in the same excesses she once would have scorched with fire. The news of this betrayal was met with profound sorrow and fury by the sororitas. To them, Miriel's existence is an abomination and an embarrassment. The Sisters of Battle have standing orders that if Miriael is encountered, she is to be purged with extreme prejudice, no hesitation, no attempt at redemption. She is the fallen sister, the living proof that even one of their own could fall, and therefore none of them may let down their guard in faith for even a moment. To date, Miriael remains at large, a thorn in the side of the Imperium, and an insult the sisterhood bears grimly. But the hunt for her never ceases. Every sister dreams of being the one to bring Miriael to justice, and if they ever catch her, the punishment will be legendary. In the meantime, Miriael serves as the ultimate object lesson if a being raised and trained as a sororitas from youth could be led astray, however rare that might be. Then truly anyone is vulnerable without constant vigilance. It only redoubles the sisterhood's zeal to police their own purity as harshly as they do that of the rest of humanity. Likewise, there have been other troubling incidents. There was an occasion on a planet called Van Horn where a splinter abbey of the Sacred Rose was infiltrated by a genes-stealer cult. Insidious xenos parasites that corrupt human bloodlines. By the time the truth was discovered, half the convent sisters had unknowingly been turned into hosts for the alien brood. When a visiting inquisitor, accompanied by his elite stormtroopers, uncovered the infestation, the uncorrupted sisters had to make a horrific choice: purge their own tainted sisters. In a night of heartache and purification, bolters thundered inside that convent's walls as the loyal sororitas executed their corrupted siblings. The Inquisitor's report commended the sororitas for their unswerving resolve to root out impurity even among their own. But it was a tragedy nonetheless, one the ecclesiarchy quietly suppressed in official annals, for it wouldn't do for the public to think even the brides of the Emperor could fall victim to alien seduction. To the sisters, it reinforced a crucial lesson. Vigilance must be eternal, and their faith must burn ever brighter. For the moment it dims, the enemy, be it chaos or Xenos, will slither in. As the Imperium's enemies grow ever more numerous and bold in this darkening age, the Sisterhood's zeal only intensifies to meet the challenge. From the quiet shrines of backwater colonies to the grand cathedrals of Terra, their voices rise in unison. A million prayers, a million battle cries, all carried on the same unwavering faith. So long as the Sisters of Battle live and fight. The Emperor's light shall never be extinguished, no matter how dark the night. Over 10,000 years have passed since the Emperor of mankind ascended the Golden Throne. In that time, countless warriors have fought and died for him. The Adepta Sororitas are unique among them, a sisterhood of warriors whose faith is their armor as much as ceramite, who have elevated the act of war to a sacrament. They chant battle sermons and call it combat doctrine. They ignite flamers and call it delivering the Emperor's justice. Cynics might say they're fanatics. The sisters would smirk and respond, "Faith is our shield. Doubt is for the weak." The Emperor, to the sisters, is not an abstract figurehead or distant icon. He is their divine father and protector. They do not merely respect him, they love him with a burning passion and worship him as God incarnate. This sets them apart even from other Imperial forces. Many Space Marines, for instance, revere the Emperor as the greatest of men, but stop short of prayer in the same devotional way. Some Astartes even have their own cult interpretations of the Imperial truth. The Sisters of Battle, however, have no such reservations. In their eyes, the Emperor truly is a living deity who hears their every prayer. Their faith is a personal relationship. They beseech him for guidance, thank him for every victory, and offer penance for any failing. Perhaps it is precisely this intense, unconditional faith that enables the miracles they experience. In the metaphysical reality of the Warhammer universe, emotion and belief can indeed shape outcomes. The warp itself responds to passion, just as the dark powers feed on despair and bloodlust. So too might the pure devotion of the Sororitas draw upon the Emperor's grace. A sister will swear that when she is chanting a battle psalm, she feels the Emperor's presence like a warm light in her soul, steadying her aim or soothing her wounds. Who can say she's wrong? Whether it's true divine intervention or the psychosomatic effect of unshakable confidence, the results are real when faith is your armor. It's amazing what you can withstand. In many documented cases, sisters have performed acts that defy reason. Surviving wounds that should be fatal simply aren't. Their aim striking exactly true at the critical moment, a flamer's burst, flaring impossibly bright, just when a heretic thinks himself safe. The sisters themselves will tell you, this is the Emperor answering their prayers. The cynical might call it coincidence or some latent psychic effect, but to those witnessing it, there's no doubt that the Emperor walks with these women in battle. Time and again, Sisters of Battle have displayed what can only be called miracles on the battlefield. Wounds that should be fatal simply aren't. Their bodies endure beyond normal human limits. A battle sister's aim might strike exactly true at a critical moment, as if guided by a divine hand. At times, a sister's flamer, or melta, will flare impossibly hot, burning through a heretic champion's prized wards, as though those defenses weren't even there. The sisters will always claim this is the Emperor's intervention, the answer to their faith. While others in the Imperium serve the Emperor, the sisters arguably have the most fervent personal devotion. To them, the Emperor is not just a distant ruler or mythic ideal. He is an ever-present guiding spirit and loving father. They pray to him like a living deity, for indeed the ecclesiarchy declares he is God. The sisters' absolute belief might actually be the secret of their power. In the warp, faith and emotion carry literal energy. It may be that their collective zeal taps into the Emperor's own psychic might, manifesting as these miracles. In a universe where dark gods grow strong on blood and fear, the sisters prove that purity and love can be just as potent a fuel. A sister superior once famously said, "The Emperor's light shines through us. We are but its lens." When one witnesses them at war, it's hard to disagree. Something more than mortal is at work. A sister's life is one of asceticism and regimentation long before she ever sets foot on a battlefield. Many sisters start as orphans of imperial servants, raised from childhood in the Schola Progenium, the Imperium's network of orphanages and academies for the children of the honored dead. The Schola Progenium is itself a harsh crucible. Its pupils, progena, are drilled in combat training, survival, academia, and above all, unyielding loyalty and faith. By the time a progena girl is in her mid-teens, she can recite entire scriptures from memory, shoot a las gun with pinpoint accuracy, and march for miles on meager rations while singing hymns of praise. Those who show exceptional piety, discipline, and martial promise are marked as candidates for the Adepta Sororitas and sent to a convent to begin their novitiate. Upon joining a convent, a young novice enters a world that is equal parts monastery, boot camp, and convent school. Every hour of the day is accounted for in a rigid schedule. At dawn, the call to prayer echoes through the stone halls. Novices and sisters alike assemble in the main chapel, kneeling in the glow of stained glass windows depicting the emperor and various saints. They chant litanies, some to seek the emperor's guidance, others to reaffirm their vows. By the time the last Ave Imperator is sung, the sun, if the planet has one visible, has barely risen, and they are already expected to be fully alert and spiritually ready for the day. What follows is a blur of training and devotional practice. A novice might spend her morning drilling with live weapons under the watchful eye of a stern sister superior, bolter practice, close combat sparring with neural whips to discourage laziness, exercises in squad coordination, all punctuated by shouted quotations from the rule of the sororitas. "Suffer not the witch to live," one instructor shouts as the trainees practice target firing at a holographic witch, or "A moment of laxity spawns a lifetime of heresy," as they practice clearing rooms swiftly. The physical regimen is grueling. More than one aspirant has collapsed from exhaustion during these trials. Some get back up and are commended for their perseverance. Others are quietly dismissed from the novitiate if deemed too frail. Those might go on to become lay staff or join a non-militant order if their faith is strong but body weak. Afternoons might be spent in the study halls or prayer cells. The sisters are highly educated in matters of theology and history, at least the ecclesiarchy's approved version of history. They pore over tomes recounting the lives of saints, imperial crusades, and previous wars of faith. They memorize the sermons of Sebastian Thor and the precise strictures of ecclesiarchal law. A sister must not only fight with bolter, but with righteous words, for part of her role is to inspire others and denounce heresy with conviction. Many sisters can quote scripture as readily as they can field strip a bolter, and they can do the latter blindfolded, by the way. Evenings are often dedicated to maintenance and contemplation. Maintenance is a holy act for the sisterhood. Cleaning one's bolter isn't just chores, it's a ritual. A sister will ritually anoint her weapon with sanctified oils, reciting the psalm of cleansing as she disassembles and reassembles each sacred component. Armor is repaired while chanting the canticle of shielding. By treating their war gear with such reverence, they ensure the machine spirits within are appeased and the weapons function at peak efficacy. It's not uncommon for a bolter that has been lovingly maintained by generations of sisters to be thought to fire truer or jam far less than one in the hands of a less devout soul. Whether that's mechanically sound or not, the sisters believe it, and perhaps the machine spirits respond to that devotion. When night falls, or whatever passes for night on a void station or ship, the sisters conclude with another prayer session, thanking the Emperor for the day's lessons and asking forgiveness for any errors. Then they retire to modest cells, little more than a cot beneath a tapestry of the Emperor's symbol, to snatch a few hours of sleep before the next day's pre-dawn prayers. Through this rigorous life, Bonds of sisterhood are forged in steel. A novice who stumbles in sword practice will find 10 sisters offering hands to lift her up after the instructor steps away. If one sister falls ill, another will wordlessly take on her duties so that no quota goes unfulfilled. They truly live as a community of faith and war. By the time a novice earns the rank of full-fledged sister, usually marked by a ceremony where she is given her order's habit and her first suit of power armor, she has been molded body and soul into a weapon of the Emperor. We've spoken much of their faith, but how does that actually translate to war? In the grand theater of battle, the Sisters of Battle are relentless and direct. They don't deploy as massive legions like the Imperial Guard. Rather, they strike as elite, purposeful forces, more akin to Space Marines in that sense, though usually in smaller numbers per engagement. A typical sororitas strike might involve a few hundred battle sisters at most, sometimes as few as a single squad, depending on the task. But each one of those sisters is worth a platoon of lesser troops in effectiveness, and certainly in morale impact. Their approach to weaponry is encapsulated in what they call the Holy Trinity of Battle: bolter, flamer, melta. These are the weapons most sacred to their cause. The bolter, or bolt gun, is a .75 caliber firearm that fires self-propelled explosive rounds. To a sororitas, the bolter's thunderous report is the voice of the Emperor delivering judgment. They maintain and adore their bolt guns with the same devotion a knight might have for his sword. Many sisters name their bolters, for example, Divine Right or Penitent's Roar. There's a tradition that a sister marks a tally in High Gothic on her bolt gun for each noteworthy foe slain, not out of vanity, but as an offering, each mark signifying another sinner dispatched unto your judgment, O Lord. When a sister superior calls volley fire, and an entire squad of sisters opens up with bolters in unison, it's like a thunderous hymn of destruction. No matter how many times one sees it, it's hard not to be awed by the discipline and firepower. The flamer, flamethrower, is perhaps the most emblematic sororitas weapon in the popular imagination. The sisters love their flamers, and why not? Fire is the ultimate purifier. A gout of promethium flame will cleanse heresy in a way everyone can understand, viscerally and finally. Cleanse with flame is practically a sisterly motto. Indeed, entire squads called Dominion squads often carry nothing but flamers or meltas to specialize in close-range shock assault. The sororitas maintain an almost ceremonial reverence for the act of burning heretics. Many carry gilded igniters or specially blessed pilot lights on their flamers. Some have flamers that have been handed down for generations, rumored to contain a vial of burning chemicals from Sebastian Thor's own torch. Likely apocryphal, but they believe it. There is no terror quite like being a heretic barricaded in a hab block and hearing the muffled chorus of "Emperor, cleanse this place," followed by the whoosh of multiple flamethrowers turning your hideout into an inferno. The sisters do not take surrender very readily. Once the flamers are lit, only ashes remain. The melta gun, or melta, is a short-ranged thermal weapon that basically emits a blast of superheated molecules capable of turning even heavily armored targets into molten slag. To the sisters, it's the answer to the particularly stubborn or heavily fortified enemies. Where a flamer cleanses the flesh, a melta unmakes the hardiest machines or mutants. They view it as the Emperor's lance, a focused beam of his wrath that nothing can withstand. A sororitas assault often pairs meltas with flamers, creating a 1-2 punch. Meltas blast open the bunker or crack the tank's armor. Then flamers bathe the exposed insides. On the receiving end, it's hard to imagine a worse nightmare, maybe being on the business end of a tyrannid digestion pool. But that's another horror entirely. And of course, they have bolt pistols, chain swords, power swords, grenades, and all manner of supporting weaponry. But bolter, flamer, melta are the holiest trifecta. Even their heavier support tends to align with this philosophy. The immolation flamer tank essentially mounts an enormous twin-linked heavy flamer on a rhino chassis, turning it into a mobile purgation vehicle. The exorcist is a marvel, a vehicle that combines music and missile artillery. It looks like an ornate pipe organ on tracks. A sister, the exorcist's gunner, literally plays a hymn on the keyboard, and each key launches a missile from the organ's pipes. It's both ridiculous and sublime. Nothing says divine retribution like killing the enemy with a choir song-turned barrage. The missiles themselves are often inscribed with psalms and have incense burning off their tails as they fly on the battlefield, the sound of an exorcist firing. A rising organ chord culminating in a thunderous whomp as rockets streak out trailing smoke is enough to send many a heretic running in irrational fear. They think the Emperor's angels are literally singing as they bombard them, which is kind of true. The Sisterhood also makes use of terrifying close support units like the Penitent Engine. Now, a Penitent Engine is not crewed by a sister, since a sister's faith is considered beyond question to need such a punishment. Instead, these engines are piloted by those deemed sinners seeking redemption, often a heretic who repented and begged for a chance to earn forgiveness in death, or a sister who committed a grave error and submitted herself to extreme penance. The pilot is wired into a walking frame covered in buzz saws, blades, and flamers. Pain stimulants and indoctrination spikes flood their mind with guilt and ecstasy in a confusing cocktail, driving them into a berserker frenzy of self-loathing and desire for absolution through death. When unleashed, a penitent engine charges the foe with no regard for self-preservation, saws whirring and flamers spewing from its arms. Enemies witness a howling figure, often visible through a front grille, thrashing in agony as they pilot the thing, laying about with insane fury. It is terrifying and extremely effective as a shock unit. To the Imperium, it's killing two birds with one stone. You kill heretics with a former heretic. To the Sisters, it's a grim but just fate for those who need it. When a penitent engine pilot dies in battle, they believe his or her soul is forgiven by the Emperor, having literally been burned clean through service. It's a fate they do not relish for anyone, but they won't hesitate to deploy it for those who must atone. On the flip side of that internal discipline are the Sisters Repentia. We touched on them earlier, battle sisters who have, in their own eyes or by judgment of their superiors, fallen short of the Sororitas standards and seek redemption in the most direct way. They strip off their power armor, fighting unarmored as a sign of humility and penance. They don simple robes or go bare-armed, save for some tattered remnants of their habits. They take up gigantic chain swords known as eviscerators, often as tall as they are, and march into the most dangerous front lines. A Sister Repentia is a fearsome sight, her hair often shorn, her body scarred from self-flagellation, eyes wild with a mix of anguish and fervor. Before a charge, a Repentia squad's appointed mistress, the one sister who remains armored and carries an electro-whip to guide them, will shout something like, "Daughters of the Emperor, repent!" And the Repentia will scream prayers of forgiveness as they hurl themselves at the enemy. They don't care about death. In fact, they court it. Their goal is to die in righteous battle, thus atoning for whatever failure haunts them. Ironically, this makes them incredibly dangerous to the enemy. You cannot intimidate or outlast someone who wants to die and take you with them. Many foes have learned that a charging Repentia feels no pain, not even when riddled with bullets. She'll keep coming, chainsword revving, perhaps limping on a shattered leg, but still intent on cleaving you in two before she expires. And if she survives somehow, drenched in the blood of the enemy, that is seen as the Emperor saying, "Your penance is not done yet. Live on and fight again." Such survivors sometimes earn their way back into the Order's ranks, their sin deemed expunged by valor. Now, one cannot discuss the Sororitas in combat without mentioning how they bolster nearby troops. The sisters fight often alongside the Astra Militarum, Imperial Guard, and sometimes Space Marines or even the forces of the Inquisition. Their presence is like a shot of adrenaline for loyal soldiers. Seeing warrior-nuns calmly advancing through fire, singing hymns, can stiffen the spine of even a panicking conscript. The ecclesiarchy often dispatches confessors and preachers with the sisters during campaigns. These fiery clergy, unarmored, waving chainswords or staffs topped with reliquaries, run among the lines bellowing sermons that reach a fever pitch. It's not unusual to hear a call and response on a battlefield where sisters are present. A preacher might cry, "Who protects us?" And the soldiers around roar, "The Emperor protects." All while the sisters themselves add their own more literal protection. By mowing down enemies, morale is as much a weapon as any gun, and the sororitas wield it expertly. Of course, the sisters themselves need no external encouragement. Their morale is virtually unbreakable. They do not retreat unless ordered by a superior or a clearly higher strategic necessity arises. And even then, some have to be commanded to fall back, or they'd fight to the last. Fear, as an emotion, has been almost surgically excised from them by faith. They truly believe if they die, they go to the Emperor's side. So what is there to fear? And they believe if they live, it's because the Emperor still has work for them, so no wound or setback can shake them for long. The Adepta Sororitas began as a spark of faith amid betrayal, a small cult of warrior women deceived by a tyrant. They transformed that shame into penitence, that penitence into strength, and that strength into a beacon of purity for the entire Imperium through fire and blood, through the singing of hymns under artillery bombardment and the recitation of litanies over the dying. They have proven time and again that faith in the Emperor is the greatest weapon of all. They are the bolter in his hand, the shield before his people, and the avenging sword that strikes down those who would lead mankind astray. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is indeed only war. But the Sisters of Battle bring not peace, only the Emperor's peace, delivered by holy bolter and hallowed blade. Even as the galaxy around them burns, they strive to make that fire a purifying one, the Emperor's flame scourging the darkness. And though their methods are brutal, their hearts, encased in ceramite as they may be, are pure and burn with love for humanity's guardian and God. They have watched worlds burn and yet kept the faith. They have seen the foulest abominations the galaxy can vomit forth, and stood firm when others faltered. They are, in a sense, ordinary human beings who accomplish the extraordinary because they believe, without question, that the Emperor walks with them. So the next time you hear a distant hymn reverberating across a battle-scarred city, or smell incense and promethium on the wind, know that the Adepta Sororitas are here. And if you ever find yourself on the wrong side of the Emperor's judgment when they arrive, well, Emperor, have mercy on you, because the Sisters of Battle certainly will not.